Just in that
past,
little bit.
a concerted effort. We had, in 18, we had a real hard time.
Someday was.
I know we were at Leadership Lawrence last Thursday. Yeah, and it's
Absolutely,
like
please do. Yeah.
not soda, and I get sick of water. I can't drink coffee past 10.
Yeah, I've had fun trying all
No,
of them.
no.
I like orange, I like grapefruit, but
I got a big gavel at home. It's always embarrassing to bring it out in a meeting, though. Idiot thinks he needs a gavel. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the December meeting of the City of Lawrence Affordable Housing Advisory Board. And the first thing I'd like to do is to move quick updates and other new business item number 1 to the front of our agenda and introduce you to our newest member, Christina Gentry. Christina, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, do I speak in this microphone? Can you hear me? Okay. I have a pretty big voice, so good morning. My name is Christina Gentry. I work at the Lawrence Douglas Health Department with a grant from Kansas Health Foundation. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I am very happy to be part of this group. This meeting is wonderful. I've had a couple of issues with affordable housing or lack thereof. Lived as a Lawrence resident for over 15 years now, myself and my family, and 5 kids. And so we have had a great time in Lawrence in being and becoming and establishing housing for my family has made a tremendous difference in the way that I've been able to move around as a resident. So I'm happy to be here, and it's very nice to meet all of you.
We're delighted to have you.
Thank you.
That leads us to first ordinary or general item of business, which is public comment. We would invite public comment. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Dave Rhodes. I'm with Wheatland Investment Group, which is Bethel Estates of Lawrence. And I wanted to just thank this board, the city council and mayor for their support. And we would just like to offer ourselves as a resource in the future. We're not going to be able to attend every meeting every month, but we would like to make ourselves available if you would like to consider us as a resource. And we just appreciate what this board's all about, and we continue to want to support affordable housing in Lawrence. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. And if you could make sure that Diane Stoddard has your contact information, she can share that with the board members. Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Yes, sir.
My name's Steve Ozark, and I know we're aware that there are people now that don't have coverage since the shelter had to reduce their capacity by half. I mean, it's very much a housing issue. We are meeting tomorrow in hopes of having a temporary weather shelter in town, but there's no certainty, and then we'll need staffing and funding and volunteers to do that. But I'm just mindful on a cold day like today to try to remember what it might be like for any of us to sleep outside tonight. Thank you.
Who are the participants in the meeting tomorrow discussing
Well,
temporary weather shelter?
the leadership, again, I'm just a mouthpiece, you know, but
Yep.
Matthew Falk is coming, and Nikki Danicki is coming, and who's our third wheel? Well, I'll think of it here in a minute, but I'd rather not go into, since it's not decided.
Sure.
We're
Sure.
trying to identify that. I mean, the thinking was if we put it into the shelter, I think they'd be willing to do that, but with the budgetary issues and the concept of the shelter having clients, I think budgetarily wise at this point, it'd be unwise and harmful to their efforts to identify their patterns as well as their economy to do so. So for now, I think a temporary shelter, but I mean, it's a huge, huge gap. I mean, they're the most vulnerable people. I'm still stunned by the 3-week notice that people were caused to leave in August. I think that's kind of unforgivable and hopefully something we won't ever repeat again. Sorry, I'm not thinking of a third person. I will, though, for
That's
the
fine.
record. Thank you.
That's fine, thank you. Do we have any other comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll move to item number 2, approve the minutes from the, whoops, I've got the wrong date in front of me. Approved minutes from the November 11th, 2019 AHAB meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Approved unanimously. Next item on our agenda is our monthly financial report. Good morning.
Good morning, Danielle Bushcutter from the Finance Department. So I wanted to highlight to you all that I am not using the Elmo for this, but actually we finally figured out our OpenGov report that we have online so that it works the way we want it to work. So I think that's the biggest highlight for this particular month. But as you can see, we do not have the December figures in yet. We usually get that about mid-month, and then it takes us a few days to get it posted. So you should be seeing the December numbers in a couple weeks. But for November, we had another good sales tax month. About $82,000 were deposited into our housing trust fund. So on the expense side, you have not seen the allocation that you guys just made. Those dollars won't be reflected in this report until we get all of the agreements actually to the commission and approved. So that's there's some timing delays with that. So wanted to make you aware. So you're just seeing the other dollars that have left this fund previously. So any questions?
Any questions for Danielle?
All right.
Seeing none. Thank you, Danielle.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Yep. Next item of business is to discuss our second round of 2019 funding process. And this is an opportunity for you to bring your ideas, your concerns, whatever it might be. I'm hoping one of the things we would discuss would be the comments about priorities from commissioners moving forward. Yes.
So I think there was a failure in our process, which was not due to us, but I felt like the Lawrence community, the homeless shelter, the way that got approached was a challenge. Since we didn't get a full presentation, that might have been something which we would have chosen to fund. But having not received a in-person proposal, I had a little heartburn over that. Because I think that, as Steve says, a part of what we have to cope with here is not just workplace housing, but also that whole homeless issue. That is, in fact, part of our affordable housing problem. And so I just wanted to express that I did have a little heartburn over how that transpired. I know that I was biased against that project because we did not get a full presentation on it. So.
Other comments?
I think it is very difficult to compare service/vouchers against capital projects. And I know when the BBC kind of made their presentation, they had like set aside buckets or, you know, like different things like that. And I wonder if because of the timing of a lot of the allocations, we really never explored that, but I wonder if it wouldn't help us if, and then if, and you know, if then you didn't get any projects in any of the buckets that you wanted to fund, you wouldn't be obligated to, but that, that we're not trying to compare apples to oranges and, you know, oranges to pears and, right, and trying to figure out how to get a matrix score for those that then it's hard to figure out how they compare to one another, so.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even the metrics that are similar end up not representing relative value, I think, between the projects somehow.
Yeah.
Other comments?
Yeah, I think that sort of apples to oranges comparison is a helpful one when you think of affordable housing in the case of like a Bethel estate and a shelter. We are looking at two radically different things.
Mm-hmm.
And to try and put them in the same bucket. And so I wonder if we might devise a way to say some of our dollars are here and some of them are going to be here. Because when they're in the same, they're not the same. And so services, we're always going to have services needs. And so how do we distinguish, I mean, they're all equal needs. And so I find myself saying, and what was the intent of the dollar, of the actual action, the tax dollars? Was it for permanent housing? Or really was it for budgetary assistance? You sort of, are you following me? And so that's always very confused in my mind.
Well, I apologize. I actually printed off last night and then forgot to stick it in my stack of papers, a copy of the handout, the
Ballot initiative.
for the ballot initiative, and the ballot initiative description of services that may be provided. Because remember, we asked people to give us sales tax authorization, an earmark, sales tax earmark, without telling them how we were going to spend the money first. Kind of an amazing leap of trust on behalf of the voters that supported with very strong majorities. But we did describe what might be done with the money, and services were explicitly referenced. What I've heard a couple of commissioners say recently, Commissioner Boley, I think, made quite a point of expressing his preference when he voted in support of the recommendations we made in our second round funding. He said he'd like to see us prioritize permanent affordable housing assets. And I've spoken to Stuart a couple of times about that. He's pretty firm that this is an opportunity to shore up our permanent housing stock. But he did also vote for the project that included, which will be rental space and not just the permanent housing. So I think it's very appropriate for us to have this discussion of, are we going to fund services? If yes, how do we want to identify do we want to identify just a portion of our revenue source? We have two revenue sources right now available to us, the sales tax earmark, and also funds that come from the state general fund through a capital, is it a CapEx budget
Yeah.
item?
Yes, correct. General.
But the source is general fund dollars originally?
Yes.
And that's about 900,000, and is it 350?
350,000.
350. So a little bit more than, not quite a 3-to-1 ratio. Yes, sir.
I'd like to suggest that we have another year before we do another distribution. And at that point, we're going to have substantially higher level of funding ability. And I think before that time comes, we should have a clarification of how do we allocate the services versus, I think that that's an important discussion, which I don't think we're going to have it right now, but I think that that is something which, in a future meeting, we should come up with a clear framework for how will those dollars get allocated. So I think that, I think that's something I really would like to have us pursue in the spring perhaps, but certainly prior to the next funding round.
Well in advance, yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to concur how important this issue is, and I appreciate the separation and understanding of that, but supportive housing is especially critical for those who are 30% or below the AMI. And the housing study showed that we had 5,000 units that we needed in rental. 2,500 of those are likely non-student housing. And I just overheard Shannon talking before the meeting started about vouchers that are awarded and in the hands of people, and they can't find landlords willing to take a risk on them. That is our experience every day at Family Promise, where people are to the point where they can afford some housing with supports and continued case management in there so that we're not just recycling people through the trauma of homelessness. So supportive case management in the homes with voucher support sometimes, or incredibly low, below market rate rentals is how we can address the 30% or below AMI.
Good comment. Other comments?
Renee Cool is the other person, the director of the shelter that's attending the meeting. And a friendly addendum to my comments, in no way was I suggesting this body and this amount of money be utilized for emergency shelter. I'm in 100% agreement with what you quote from Stuart Bowley, that this be used for permanent structure that's permanent as much as possible. I hope that the temporary shelter and weather shelter becomes a line item in the general fund of the county and the city combined efforts. Thank you.
Just a moment, just a moment. It's not my intention to open up for public comment right now. I'd like to complete discussion here with the board. But then we'll give you a chance to comment. Other comments from the board?
If I may.
Yes, ma'am.
I realize that I'm here for a position of lived experience. And so if I can just kind of share a moment with you about how permanent housing is affecting the issue and how much Lawrence really supports the affordable housing and the homelessness situation, how we really want to kind of band together and make sure this issue is no longer one. So if I can say that myself personally living under the 200% poverty level and understanding how much, even with the voucher, how difficult that was for my family and I to gain any kind of person who was going to rent to us. So I was almost on the cusp of losing my voucher because there was a discrimination with the people who have vouchers, and Section 8 is looked upon as something as being negative. So we have to be cognizant of that situation, and even with the voucher system that we have now, I think is wonderful, and I think we'll go into more explanation of that if Sharon or we will be able to explain that more. But I'm hoping that what I'm hearing is we're not going to take a year to really kind of, and I apologize for getting into a situation, a conversation that I'm just coming in today, but I feel remiss not to speak up on maybe having small increments throughout the year where we discover what the gaps and the barriers are for people who are going to be receiving these vouchers or the system, and that we don't give a time frame that is for a situation that is very, I would say, pervasive, and understanding that these are gaps into our system, that families and children will be suffering because of the trauma that is experienced by lack of affordable housing or homelessness. So we have a few people who are on the streets now because they were kicked out of the shelter, and these are not families, but these are people, and if I can say about myself, I had to separate myself from my family. So I would have been the person that was on the street because I didn't have my family with me. They were in a different state with my mother. So going back to that and not taking up too much of the board's time, I think we should always be kind of flexible, and I remind ourselves that time for us is almost a privilege, and not everyone has that amount of time for us to make decisions based on our knowledge. I mean, there's got to be an understanding of sometimes we're going to have to make our time be flexible for those to meet the needs of the most fragile of our population. Thank you.
Mhm. Other comments? I would add that as part of the process, given that we've got two new city commissioners also, I'd like us, and I or whoever's chair next year, I think should maybe ask the commission formally at one of their meetings if it's their desire for us to send them projects only in a narrow scope, or if it's their preference for us to, as we've done with our original goal setting, invest dollars in each of the major areas that we see there is a need, which would include supported services, vouchers, and creating rental units that are good and welcome places for voucher holders to land for housing. I think it's part of our fine-tuning our process, but also getting some additional direction from the city commission. For us to send them projects that don't reflect their priorities, I mean, that would not be an efficient use of our time for them to send to tell us that we're not reflecting the priorities that they feel. I would rather we get some guidance from them, some informed guidance from them, because I think the comments that have been made about the importance of supportive services are very compelling to me. I don't know that all of the commissioners have had an opportunity to hear those arguments. And I don't know that the majority of the board shares my view that is a priority. I mean, that's one of the things we need to develop and test over the next few months. But I think those two items ought to go hand in hand.
And I think that some of that funding may not be in this, it's important to our city, but may not be the goals of.
May not be the scope of this board.
But I think that this board has a voice that needs to exercise the importance of those things over and over and over again, whether or not the commission gives this as a priority for our board or not. This is a reality in our community that needs to be spoken out from this body and from all other agencies, those of us who work in this field, the health department and everywhere else, because this is so critical. These are those who are most vulnerable in our community. And it's easy today to think of that because we all froze walking between our cars in this building, but this is an everyday occurrence. Family Promise this year alone has received 368, as of 2 weeks ago, new families calling in need of our services. Last year we received 294 in the whole year. So this problem of families is not, and homelessness is not on the decrease. And 50% of those who we serve are under the age of 5. This is a serious problem for our city.
Repeat that, 50% of the people you serve are under the age of 5.
Year after year.
Mm-hmm.
Ron, you raised an important question. We bumped up against this just a little bit early on, or at least it was early on for me, last time, when the commission asked us, why did you do this? And they wanted it done a different way. So, and since we have two new commissioners, it might be interesting to know how they see the relationship. You suggested asking them what their priorities are, so that we send them things that match their priorities. Or is the relationship, we hear what they're interested in, but we are recommending to them what we see as a board as important, or what is the balance there? And it might be interesting to have a conversation with them as a new commission, just what is the relationship, so that we sort of understand that as we start working with them.
I think that's a great idea. Diane, is it possible for us to get a working session with the commission sometime early next year?
I know the commission has met with various boards. An example, they meet with the planning commission, for example, in their annual retreat. And so, I was sitting here thinking there's a couple ways to approach this kind of thing. Obviously, you have been sending to the commission with your recommendation for funding, the application form, for them to approve before that funding notice is released. So it could be a discussion perhaps at that time, or you could have it in as part of a retreat, you could invite them. My suggestion would be if you'd like to do the latter, it would be appropriate for this board to have a motion to make that request of the commission, and we could put it on the commission agenda for them to receive that and perhaps work with scheduling. So, and I was thinking a little bit about your comments, Thomas, on the timing of maybe the next application and when to discuss that, and it interrelates with one of the items on your agenda, and that is the timing of a retreat. So you might want to either decide if you'd like to have a retreat in January, which has been the traditional time, or if you wanted to do one later in the year and just have a regular meeting next month, for example. You might want to have a little bit more board discussion, maybe on a few of these items with the funding before you have the commission. That's up to you all to discuss, but those would be my suggestions.
I think those are excellent comments. And my original comment was not intended to create a situation where this board deferred to the city commission, but rather to ensure that we were doing work that they found useful in their decision-making. No. But I think this kind of give and take that, I think there's a desire for us to have some exchange and conversation, give and take with commissioners. Yes, Dana?
I was, of course, absent during the most important meeting of the year last time, but I watched it all.
As I recall, you were doing some pretty good things.
I watched it all and was very pleased with the conversation and the dialogue, and I think we've learned a lot over the years as a board. Well, one thing I've heard one of the new commissioners talk about, and I think it's a really interesting possibility, maybe talk and have that discussion and recommend, but also rank all of the projects. Some of them may fall out of, they might be worthy of funding somewhere else in the city, but they might fall out of our objectives and goals as a board. And why should they stop then with us? When an agency or an organization has gone into a lot of work, if it's a worthy project, it's a worthy project of being funded by our city. Just an option to rank them. We've done the hard work of looking at all the projects, maybe making our recommendations of the top 2 or 3, but also sending all that data together with them and saying, as a board, we rank the projects in this order, 1 through 10 or 1 through 7.
I like the prioritization that creates. I'm also mindful, we've also been talking about how services and hard assets seem to be in two different buckets and hard,
Yeah, if we-
hard to compare side by side.
If we did something like that, what I'd love to see is a separate application process in totality for, or open it up if there's a joint project that also has a building project and supportive services support embedded in that project. That would be wonderful. That'd be a home run for sure. But if we do separate pots of money, then I think that it would be easier for all of us to grapple with if they were separate application processes.
Other comments from the board about, yes, ma'am. Shannon.
So the other comment that I have heard from some of the commissioners is the idea that we don't wait for applications to come to us and that we go find projects we really like. And while some of us, that may be work we do, it's really not work that this board would do. And unfortunately, with Alyssa leaving, I think the point person in the city, we're kind of in a holding process. But that is the other thing, and I do think we want to have that conversation with the commissioners about what do you, and what is the expectation for that, and whose work is that? And it may be they want me, or they want Rebecca, or they want Erica, Dana to go do that kind of thing, but it may be they want it to be a city function, and maybe we're players, but I just really don't know sort of what they're hoping for us to go generate.
Yeah.
And I keep hearing the universe city, and I'm like, I don't disagree, but I also am not capable of doing that type of a project, right? I think it was Iowa City, right, who did that project. The city did it. And so that's the other piece that I also think, I'm hearing a lot of dialogue every time I meet with one of the commissioners, but I don't know sort of exactly how they expect us to do that.
I've been drawn into some of those conversations also. I've had to tell a couple of developers, we're not the group handing out tax abatements, right?
Right.
That's a decision made someplace else. We're also not the group that intervenes and negotiates on your behalf with the planning department. Which was a request I had recently. But my sense is very much like yours, that there's a function that needs to be performed. I had thought at one point in time that the Community Foundation might be able to serve as a facilitator between the city and developers, but I don't know that that's a function that CHIP necessarily wants to take on either. I've been encouraging the private sector people that have visited with me, and some of them have, interestingly, been not-for-profits that aren't represented here around the table, that are thinking, well, if there's dollars available, maybe we should get into the housing business also. Talk directly to the city manager and the city commissioners. We can make recommendations, but we kind of have a full plate doing what we're doing right now and not putting projects together. And then if someone here at the table, when you put a project together, Shannon, then we take you out of the decision-making process, okay? So how then do we ask the AHAB board members to try to go make things happen, but then if they're directly involved in any way, we have to take them out of the decision-making process. So I think there's some awkward role definition that needs to be clarified, and maybe some gaps that can be filled at different points. And I assume we're gonna look for a backfill for Alyssa?
Yes,
Yes. Okay, yeah.
quickly, yes.
Pardon me?
It's already posted.
Is that, okay, very good.
Okay, good.
Very good. And gosh, I was delighted to see that she joined the Kansas Housing Commission,
Yes.
as opposed to jumping back over to the Missouri side of the line.
Yes, she'll still
Just-
be able to be
I'm a little
helpful
competitive
to us
about
and
that.
the rest of Kansas and that
Yeah.
job, so.
Yeah, so,
Big more.
it'd be good for us to have her in that role, yes.
As
yes,
serious as the problem is in our community, I really feel kind of awkward us meeting throughout the year for the big one-time evaluation in November. I know why we set that up, and I was agreeing with that, but the urgency of what we have to do is, there's gotta be other functions that we can do besides just review these bids that come in at the end of the year for next year's funding. And that's what you were talking about with finding out how we can be more utilized, I think. So I just don't, you guys did your work in November. I don't want us to just do study sessions between now and,
Next November.
I want to move the needle somehow.
I think that is absolutely right. And all year long, one of the messages I've tried to share with people is that for all the good we might be able to do with $1.3 million a year, we'll have more impact on housing costs with the policies that the city does or doesn't adopt than we have with our $1.3 million. We can do some great things with the $1.3 million, but to move the trend line significantly long-term will require housing policies that encourage the building of inexpensive housing. And we've done some of that. And in fact, I think we had a real breakthrough moment with the density housing bonus. And I think many aspects of Plan 2040 are encouraging of affordable housing also. I'm very anxious to see how that broad structure gets granulized into policies and things that actually happen on the ground. One thought I had is some of the most pressing pressing needs, and I think this is what you were speaking to, Christina, are the ongoing need to put people into short-term housing, the ongoing need to prop up families and find places where they can take a voucher and find housing. If conceivably, here's a potential model. If we were to have funds earmarked for services or supportive services and other funds earmarked for large projects, it would make sense to me that we could do something on a more frequent basis with the funds that are earmarked for services, rather than wait till the end of the year to distribute them, but make them available perhaps as the funds are available. And then, I still see some value, I still see, in fact, significant value, if we want to encourage larger projects, at least in our current application process and our current funding process. To encourage larger projects, we need to have some larger sums available. And I can see why it makes sense for the sales tax dollars to collect for several months before we do a distribution. Whether it should be 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, I don't know if there's a perfect answer there. But when we get to a threshold where we can do something meaningful, and I think that should be at least once a year.
I think that's a piece of our retreat is our planning through
Is determining that.
It's figuring out, what's the percentage, or what's the raw dollar number, or and how does that all look? I think
And what's the source?
Yep, I think we'd all be in concurrence with you on that.
Other comments from the board about this process?
Can I suggest that we do that process, our retreat process, where we really do kind of outline vision, goals, pots of money, how we imagine allocations, meeting those visions and goals. And that sounds way up here, but more specifically, I think we're all talking about this of that we want this impact for supportive services and this impact for how many units do we want to build. And having, I know we can't be exact, but having some clarification on those pots. And that allows us to then be much stronger with our voice throughout the year of a vision, of a goal, of a kind of affordable housing advisory board. This is what we support, and an education process with the commission, and that we have a document that kind of, nothing long, a page or two, that kind of lays that out before we ask the commission about their input. Because I think they're asking us for that. And I think they have from the get-go, right, of what we've done all the research, and we're in the field, and, what are the greater needs right now. And so I feel like that would be a great way to get their input versus what do you guys want from us, of saying, here's a vision, here's some pots of money, and here's how we imagine meeting these goals, which we already have goals of, which I think are great, but kind of talking about how the funding pots can meet those goals, and those allocations can meet that, and then we're kind of painting that picture to start with, and then we get feedback from that.
What I like about this discussion and the direction you just described is what I like about this is that we make better use of the expertise around the table, who are familiar with the projects that are under discussion now, the areas of town where people are showing the most interest, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit developers, and we can fine-tune our broad goals, our project initiatives, to take advantage of the timeliness of what's happening around us, rather than looking at 4 broad goals that were based on a data point that's now almost 2 years old, that doesn't have the benefit of knowing what's going on in the ground right now. So I think that's all good for our discussion for a retreat. And I like that idea that we need to come to the discussion with the commissioners, not with a blank page, but with a recommendation of, here's what your AHAB, here's what your advisory board sees is going on in the community right now, and where we can have the most impact.
And I think, going back to the original question, if you can bring those printouts that you said you printed this morning for the original pamphlets, and the language that goes back to the sales tax initiative, so that we're being true to what the voters voted for.
Yes.
That's got to be part of our agenda for our retreat, I think.
And the other documents that I think we should include is the BBC had a suggested allocation. So at least that's a place we can start looking. I don't necessarily know if I agree with everything that they did. And the other piece of information we need is the document that Danny and Brad brought 2-3 meetings ago about what's funded out of home and CDBG funds, and then also the allocation on outside agency funding. Because if we really want all of the information about where is the city putting the money, we need all of those documents.
Was the genesis of this board strictly to advise on the tax dollars, or
No,
is it
it's
just,
not.
are we allowed to see the big picture and advise on the big picture?
Yes,
So,
sir.
a concept came to mind, and maybe you guys are saying the same thing, but a concept would be, and it could be cringeworthy to some, and it could be, you guys could immediately tell me this is out of bounds and outside of our realm of scope of work, but as an advisory board, even though we don't have a final say on how monies are spent, it could be that we look at city services and advise how the city is spending their dollars, and advise how, when we're running short on being able to help services, that's more of a steady stream need throughout the year, would it be valuable, or a concept to explore, to advise to look at how the city's spending their services dollars and advise them on how maybe they could, or, you know, tweak that, or, you know, alternate, or, you know, divert some funds as it is needed throughout the year.
Paul, I think that's fully within our scope.
For me, it falls in line too with the idea of prioritizing the proposals we got that we couldn't fund, so it's right in sync with that.
And I imagine if we have a document that kind of says, here's the amount of services we think we can provide, or the city needs to provide, and here's what we can, but here's the gap, then we have a document we can speak from as a voice for what do we need for affordable housing, which we are called to.
Yeah, and just to clarify, you're talking about social services. Is that what you're talking about? Not like streets and
Yeah.
sidewalks and
Right.
all of that kind of thing? Okay, great. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think that works bigger.
Yeah, that was a lot.
We could get into sidewalk repair.
No, we should steer clear of that.
No one wants to touch that tar baby.
We named, I think, 2 levels of conversation. One is relationship with the commission. What's the relationship and how we're gonna work with the commission? And the other is specific. I don't wanna miss either of them.
Something that also comes into play in all of this is the home dollars that we will be allocating as well as a body. Danny, can you remind me of the timeline on that?
We are looking to bring those to this board in March. The applications will go out in January and probably have about 45 days, 30 to 45 days to fill them out.
And the home dollars already have priorities and goals and all of that aligned.
The home
with
dollars
the
have
dollar.
requirements.
Have requirements,
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
I just think that's an important piece to remember as we're thinking about timelines and prioritizing and our goals and
Good point.
pots of money.
How large is that?
Was it 380 last year? 360? 410? It was about 400.
Roughly 400,000.
Yeah, yeah. But that's, as we mentioned, split into pots, so, which will give you a full home 101 before you guys are charged with looking at those.
Well, and it's gonna be real important because at least 3 of us will not be in the room. So,
We can for the 101.
yeah. We can be for the 101, we can't be for the allocation.
And it is possible we'll get more applicants this year for
Right.
that money too.
How many applicants were there for the 1 million last year?
How many were in here? 3, 4?
3,
4.
4,
Yeah, because, no, 3. Yeah, it was 3.
unless you count yourself,
No.
right?
Huh.
I mean, I wouldn't count you.
Well, I guess, yeah, technically first time home buyer.
Any other board discussion? Great input, very good input. I'll now open up this topic for any comments from the audience. Anyone who'd like to comment on the 2019 funding process? Yes, ma'am.
I'll be brief, and then I'll maybe try to write this in a letter and share with you. I just...
For the purpose of the people that
Yes,
view
Sarah.
the video later, please identify
Yes, I'm
yourself.
Sarah Taliaferro, and at the moment, just speaking for myself, as an informed voter, let's just say that. First, I just wanted to acknowledge the wisdom and expertise around the room, and I liked the comment of empowering yourselves to know what you know and to share those truths that you know. That this is a powerful conversation that you have here, and so, and then I wanted to mention a couple things. First, in Lawrence, some of the persistent gaps in the continuum of care over the years involves transitional and supportive service or housing that includes services, and is one of the reasons people fall through the cracks or do not progress out of homelessness as fast. And if we have we already have a good network, but we need so much more. It also is a network of services that already does and can build on being a prevention a component to all of this complex of needs. So it is an important component to think about those services and supports. I just wanted to mention, you know, we had done, through Justice Matters, we had done some research on model cities, and so I wanted to reiterate things I actually am hearing you comment on, but most of the cities that have affordable housing trust funds do have someone like Alyssa, who just left, so it'll be great to refill that position. So it's someone who works with other experts in the city who know the federal and state funding and coordinate it. You can't be too strategic about this. So the cities who've been more effective are doing exactly what you're saying and pooling those different resources and you know, making things happen in creative ways. Some of the communities actually set annual priorities and review what the needs are and how those needs change, because they will change each year and your opportunities will change. And then they design RFPs and do public outreach and education to proactively get the kinds of successful applicants that you want, given the need. Some of them, such as Nashville, Tennessee, actually had 3 different applications. One was for rentals. I agree with what you were saying, that you're not going to get where you need, we are not going to get where we need to go as a community unless we figure out how to capture more rentals, have forgiveness programs, have rehabs, have a network of policies and processes to capture more of the housing stock we already have as permanently affordable, and voucher use is part of that. So all of the communities really emphasize permanent affordability, because if you have something that's affordable for 10 or 15 years and then goes back on the private market, you're spoon and sand. But if you have something that's 30 years or more out, affordable, and to the population you really want to serve, then you're making momentum on the problem.
Can I pause and ask you a question
absolutely.
there, Sarah?
Yeah, please.
And this may be more just a personal opinion rather than a position of any
Sure.
organization you
Absolutely.
represent. That's fine.
Yes.
But you've heard some of the discussion by candidates and commissioners, and you've attended several of our board meetings over the course of the past year and more. Are you comfortable as a citizen, as you say, as a taxpayer, are you comfortable that as we're trying to approach the problem, we're funding projects that have a 30-year affordable life?
My personal feeling, yes. I think in conversations I've had with you, for example, 30 years is kind of the lifetime of a building without some major rehab, if it's well maintenance. It doesn't mean that it won't be, you can't renew the affordability of it, but at least 30 years. And in some communities, that actually is how they define permanent.
Okay.
But just because of structures. One last point, and then I'll sit down. Some communities in their application process have a system of bonus points. So that might be because of the service component or some other thing that you deem valuable, so that you give some boost to projects that are targeting the people most in need, or the greatest needs of the community. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That'll conclude, yes, sir, I'm sorry, excuse me.
No
An
problem.
additional comment, yes, David.
Dave Rhodes with Wheatland Investment Group. 2 things I think separating capital improvements to services is really important, and I would encourage the board to definitely consider that. And I would suggest that you look at a percentage of dollars, the total dollars, and not try to allocate 300 versus 1 million. Take a percentage and say, this percentage we're allocating toward those two buckets. And if one bucket doesn't have applications, the dollars are allowed to flow to the other bucket. The other thing that I would like to suggest is that you have an alternate list. On capital improvement projects, there's lots of moving parts, tax credits, planning and zoning, all the things that go with it. And having an alternate person behind the one that you approve might be important to say, if this one falls out, you are the first alternate to get this award if we can't make the first one. And maybe have it as many as 1 or 2 deep on alternates so that you've got the ability to allocate your funds towards some alternate and still make the capital improvement that you'd like to see happen. Maybe it falls out for one reason or another. 2008 and 9 is a great example of a lot of things that fell out really quick because it didn't happen. So my only other comment on affordability, permanently affordable, you really need a project to be rehabbed in that 25, 30-year period. And to keep a project forced to be permanently affordable, when you go to do a rehab, you're spending somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 per unit. And if it has existing debt on the property, you can't refinance the project without additional supportive either tax credits or coming back to your board and asking for $1 million for the rehab. And I just would encourage you not to go beyond the 30-year commitment because it will create blight, possibly, because it can't be rehabbed affordably. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That'll conclude our discussion on item number 2, discussing our 2019 funding process. We'll move on to item 3, which is an update on our AHAB goals.
So prior to Alyssa leaving, she prepared this document, and so I printed it out for you here. It's a little bit easier, at least for me, to see in this larger format. And I wanted to make a couple of comments about this as we are working on the annual report that's required for you all. We are kind of looking at these numbers just to verify that we've caught them all correctly. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that these do presume is counting the units and the projects that go back to the original creation date of this board as opposed to the date when you created your goals, which was just last year. You created the broad goals that are being measured here. So one of the discussions might be, we're kind of presuming that it would be good to have credit for that toward all of the goals that you created last year, because I know it kind of took a while for these goals to be solidified, but that's how we're counting them, and we just wanted to bounce that off of you. So again, as you're looking forward at your upcoming annual report that we're working on, if there's any feedback that you all have about how we're counting these units, it'd be helpful.
So the date that would capture only the sales tax dollars is the shaded area on the right. Starting with the
The 2019 dollars would be
yes.
at least partially the last allocation, the most recent allocation that you did. The allocation that was earlier in the year would have been general fund dollars. Danielle's shaking her head, so.
Yes, that last application, not the one we did a month ago, but the one right before that was the first time we really used sales tax dollars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, isn't this one?
Any questions, comments, corrections, updates?
this time to intervene with how we are publicizing the application process to our public for any nonprofits or for any other people who may be interested in submitting an application. Working as community liaison, I know that communication is key, and I'm just wondering how we utilize or how we publicize the upcoming opportunities for our public to submit an application for one of these opportunities.
Can you give us an overview, Diane?
Yes, I'm gonna say what I know, and then the rest of the staff can chime in if you know of other avenues. But I know that we've done a news release that's general, that indicate, it's a general notice to the community. We've also done some outreach with social media. And I don't know if there's any other examples that you all have of, or that you are aware of. Those are the two that. Demand Star. So Demand Star is our city system where we announce bids for projects and things like that. So we do utilize that too as a general notice. I think some of it too is kind of word of mouth from this board and others as you're talking with folks in the community. But if you have any other ideas of things, we're certainly open on ways to get the word out better.
Yeah, and then we also have the benefit of several of the executive director or chief executive officers for the major not-for-profits that are working in this space in Lawrence are already serving on the board. I think where we might have the area where I think we probably have the most improvement that needs to be made is communicating with private developers. And that's no disrespect to Tom and Paul and the roles they play representing private sector organizations that are also stakeholders. But because I know from running not-for-profit organizations that your members don't read your newsletters very well sometimes, or attend the meetings you'd like them to, and they end up relying on just snippets of information that they get from a newspaper or hear in comments, and don't necessarily know all that we're trying to do. But I think it's an area where, particularly as we start to make a mark in the community with some of our numbers, and we're showing some great numbers, I think, for just getting out of the gate. I'm expecting that particularly the paper will continue to give us good coverage of the projects as they come on board. That's happened already. We had great coverage of the rescheduled transitional home that Bert Nash just broke ground on, what's that been, a month ago now? And we've got a lot of improvements we can make. Most of the people that are engaged in the game are already pretty dialed in when these when these announcements come available. We're probably not reaching out very well and getting the smaller developers, the mom and pops that maybe now, for example, with the opportunity to build a second affordable home on a lot, we might get more of the attention from some of the smaller investors and developers that would like to capture some of those kinds of infill projects.
Ron, the other
Yes, ma'am.
place is this is a big plank in the community health plan.
Yes. Yeah.
And so even nonprofit and other agencies are routinely in the steering committee and various different times getting an update on what is happening in this area. So that is another really great convergence of effort.
Anything else? Thank you for this. And do we need to take any action, Diane, with this?
No, I don't think so. If you're looking at it closer, if you all have any questions or comments that you can think of, you could just feel free to direct that to me. And then you'll kind of see this again as it relates to the annual report that we're putting together for you for this year. And we'll continue to get better about this reporting and how it's reported on the website. Bear with us as we get our staff, solidified with that. But our goal is to have a very succinct and nice summary of
Kind of a dashboard
where the money's
that we
been.
can look
Yes,
at
a
and see where the
dashboard
funds
that's
are.
really nice, and that then people could drill into more deeply on any of these particular projects if they want to see more detail. But yes, a dashboard is exactly what we're trying to go for.
Okay. Any other board discussion on AHAB goals at this time? Seeing none. Item number 4, discuss our 2020 plans, including selection of a board chair and retreat details. Shall we work with board chair selection first?
Yes.
All right.
I think you've done an excellent job. We talked about this, I think, last meeting about having you continue on. And I would like to see you continue this position. I've been on too many boards where the turnover, it stops momentum. And I think that you have done a superb job as chair of this board. And I would suggest that if you would be open to it, that you would accept a nomination for chair again.
I see some nodding heads. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. This has been a tremendous pleasure to serve in this role, and a responsibility that I've taken very seriously. And I would be pleased to serve in this role again for 2020. I will say that 2020 will be the last year that I will serve in this role. In 2021, I'm in line to assume the responsibilities to be chair of the Lawrence Arts Center in the summer of 2021. And I don't want to try and take on dual chair responsibilities that year. I think that would be a guaranteed way to underperform in both roles. And I'm not looking to do that. But with your support, I'd be delighted to serve as the chair next year. And if you see or hear me doing things that you don't approve of, and a couple of you have from time to time, thank you very much, let me know. And one of the things that I did get a chance to do this fall that I'd like to do more of is I made a presentation at one of the Rotary clubs, just kind of an update on what AHAB's all about and what we're doing. And this was prior to our 2 projects being announced. But I look forward to doing more of those kinds. I'd like to get in at least 1 or 2 presentations a month with some of the other civic organizations in the community. And this gets to part of your comment, Christina, about, how are you communicating with the community about what you're doing. Staff put together a very workable, straightforward presentation of about 20 slides that are available that describes kind of from step 1, where AHAB came from, what our mission is, what our four goals are. And if you want to do any editorializing, you can see a couple of the editorial slides that I created for myself at the end. So you can, I don't think anyone has to stay on script. I think when we make these presentations, it's important to represent the board, but also share what drives us in this space also, what excites our passions as well. All right, thank you very much. Let's move then to retreat details. And is there any initial planning that's been looked at with any calendar dates? Yes, David.
Do we need a vice chair chosen?
My suggestion, Mr. Chair, is that
Yes.
I think your bylaws are specific about the date in January to make the appointment of the chair and vice chair.
Okay.
My suggestion would we put that on the agenda in the January meeting to
Okay.
have that. But yes, you're right, there is a vice chair that needs to be selected as well.
And that date, anyone have the date for that January meeting?
Looks like the 13th.
13th.
There you go.
Yeah. And I will not be in town that day. So.
Oh, you should
I
never
know, I was
let us
like,
know, huh? Yeah.
Well played.
Well played.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Pay to be absent.
Yeah, excellent. That'll teach you.
So you have a couple of options, I think, here, Mr. Chair. You all could have a regular meeting on January if you wanted to, and then look at setting another date for a retreat. I think last year, we kind of utilized the January meeting for that, and we just extended it longer, if I recall right. I've got a few nodding
No, I
heads.
think that's right.
And so,
From 10 to 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that what we did, 10 to 3?
I think so.
so we could do something similar to that, or if another date would be better, we could work on trying to set another date, or if you wanted to have that, for example, in your February meeting, you could do that. So there's lots of different options depending on what you'd like to do, or if you wanted to have, you break this up into a couple of different discussions, you could do that and not have maybe quite as long of a retreat as you did this last year, but kind of have one focused on maybe what you want to try and do this year, maybe one on the funding process and inviting the commissioners. So just up to you all how you'd like to work that.
Comments, suggestions, input on retreat format, things you'd like to discuss? We've already identified several items that I think that we'd like to have discussed in retreat format. People comfortable that we can do that in one retreat, or do you think that we need to split that up into a couple of pieces? A couple of longer meetings?
I'm a fan of trying to get it all accomplished in one extended period. That way we can focus and spend some good time discussing and not have to walk away and remember what we have to still discuss. If we could just get it all done in one.
So my question is, we have some regular occurring monthly business that we do. We get the reports from Danielle, there's a variety of things. Would having that interfere with that protracted retreat time? Should we do it at the same time, or should we do it at a different time? Strikes me that, or January rather, there's not gonna be an awful lot of regular business to do, so it might make sense to do a full board, maybe spend the first half hour with those rote subjects and go from there.
That sounds good, and then I could suggest if there's an item we can't get to within that time, then we would have February's meeting to, kind of have a backup plan if there's something we really like to get to.
I would hate to miss out on Shannon's invaluable input, though, in January.
And I agree with that. Yeah, I'd like to have you there for any retreat presentation, as we discuss the items that that several have mentioned today. Yes,
So
sir?
do we have the luxury of pushing the retreat out into February?
I think,
Do you know what your
and then you're out on February, are you?
I have no plans to be anywhere in February. And if I'm looking at the right date, it is the 10th,
The 10th is,
and I will be here. And, maybe they can do the home tutorial on January, and then we can do the retreat in February, because
I will be here in
Not-
January.
How many do we lose
Oh,
in
no.
February? Anyone else know for sure? Just on the randomness, let's look at March 9th. What's March 9th look like?
When's the home?
The home allocation decisions will be in March. So, technically that could be part of your retreat, I guess, as long as it's still an open meeting.
And
That's
your-
spring break?
your
Oh,
your
that's
meeting,
good. Okay.
your meeting that day is on spring break, so that may be something that you want to discuss too. Maybe next meeting have that discussion. I just don't want to have it earlier. Do you want to reschedule that anyway?
Perhaps we should schedule a time that's not at a regular meeting. I think we will be better off doing this earlier rather than later. And so perhaps we pick a time in either late January or February that might work for that. I fear that we continue to push it out, that we lose our momentum on it.
And I agree, because if we're gonna do the two things, we're gonna decide our priorities and then try to do a study session with the commission, that gets us way far out.
So should we look at a second meeting in January perhaps?
The fourth week in January?
27th?
Yeah.
Works for me.
Yeah, you lose your chair, I
Uh-oh.
think. Hang on here, let me figure this out.
And the 20th is Martin Luther King.
Nope, I'm here for the 27th, I can do
Oh,
that.
great.
What we could do
Yep.
is,
Yep.
we could send a poll out to the board if you want to give us a time frame. If you want to look, you know, in the area of late January to mid-February or so, we could look at possible dates and get one identified for your next meeting, and then you could discuss it more, if that.
Can we see a show of hands for who could not make it on the 27th of January?
Do we have conflicts on the 27th right now?
How late? What time?
What- tell us what
When do you have
works.
a conflict?
I have a 2 o'clock meeting.
2 o'clock?
Standing 2 o'clock meeting.
Yeah. If we went from 10 to 2?
Or 10 to 1:45 for
10
someone?
10 to 1:45, yeah. 10 to 2, and I think we could probably arrange to have some lunch brought in,
I'm
couldn't
looking,
we?
I think, I have a major staff conflict that day personally.
Okay.
That I have reserved, so I would be unable, I think Danielle is in the same boat. Neither of us would be able to, it related to our other strategic plan work for the city.
Okay. So might be a good opportunity for the mice to play while the cats are away. There's conflict there.
Is moving our meeting up a week to February 3rd a possibility?
Works for me.
February 3rd.
And
So
having
doodle
that, having
poll
that
maybe
take the,
might
having
be
that
the
take the
best.
place of the February meeting?
Yes, that's what I was anticipating. No. So maybe a poll would be best then.
Yep.
I could do that.
Okay.
Why don't we throw out a couple different options, and then we'll come back with a report for you in January, at the January meeting, and then you can look and see, okay, what does our best option look like? So we'll just throw out a variety of different dates for you to
Okay.
consider.
And in the meantime, if anyone has other items that we haven't yet identified that you'd like discussed during the retreat, please forward those to me or Diane, or both.
So can we summarize briefly what we have talked about?
Because we've talked about a lot, haven't we? Yeah.
That we want to make sure we capture on the retreat. So a revision, a review of our goals and objectives based on both the ballot language and previous retreat efforts, so that we understand what our purposes are. Kind of a revisiting of that purpose is what I heard a lot of conversation about this morning.
Yeah, I think of this as kind of an updating and refresh on our goals
Okay.
for the purpose of guiding our decision-making for the next 12 months.
Okay, that sounds good.
So I don't view it as stepping away from our longer-term goals or even our 5-year goals, but looking even a little bit more immediate to see which of those are maybe the most pressing priorities for the community, or where do we have the best opportunities, because the projects that are being surfaced from some of you and others are maturing and available now to make some headway on some items that maybe we don't see every year. So I think that's certainly one area.
I think there was a big issue with looking at the allocations, percentage or buckets or whatever,
And that,
capital projects and support.
and that's in the BBC. They had a suggested one. I think we can look, I mean, we can use this to look at our own.
Mhm. Mhm. But I think it needs to be addressed. I mean, that seems to be a
Mhm.
constant
Mhm.
confusion
Mhm.
issue.
And the outside agency funding or
Mhm.
social service, I don't know.
Home CDBG and outside agency
Yeah.
funding, just a summary is what I heard that you all would like. One other thing that wasn't mentioned on the list that we've talked about before is a discussion of the toolkit and prioritizing some of the items there, which might be good for you all to have a discussion about depending on how much time you have. Those are more on the policy issue front or things like that you talked about earlier today. And that might be good to prioritize. We can't do everything at once in that toolkit, but what are the biggest priorities that you want us to look at?
And are you aware, are there any emerging projects that have been discussed with city staff that would require any type of further modification of our building codes, our planning documents? I mean, the two small homes on one lot was a real departure. Do we have any, and that came up because we had a project that was timely to consider that kind of a building strategy. Anything else like that emerging on the horizon that you see?
Well, there were some ideas in the toolkit, and again, I think maybe refreshing our minds about what all was in there. There were some policy items in there, some of which have been
And some of them
discussed
would
here today.
require some modifications to city policy, wouldn't
Right,
they?
for example, one item is, could be a requirement of people to accept vouchers. That was one of the items that was in the toolkit. And some communities have had such discussions. So that might be something. The other thing I was just, as I read through this new American Planning Association Housing Policy Guide, there were a lot of different policy ideas that were in there. That might be some other things to spur some discussion in a retreat session and see what maybe we were missing in the toolkit that were ideas that were covered here. But I'm not aware of anything really specific on that particular front. There is a discussion about, what are our housing needs more generally, and are we sitting with enough inventory for all different kinds of housing incomes? It's partially
Inventory for lots.
Inventory
Yeah.
for lots, and that's somewhat is related to the purview of the board as it relates to affordable housing, but it's larger because there's a discussion about housing for all different kinds of incomes, and that is one of the pillars of the economic development chapter anyway in the Plan 2040 is having that kind of a strategy. So those are the only things that I'm really aware of. What we could do as it relates to the agenda, just to reflect it back to you, is at the January meeting, we could have a draft, make sure that we've captured what you want on the
Okay.
agenda for discussion, and then we could make any other modifications that you'd like.
Very good.
That sounds okay?
And then we'll finalize a date for a retreat at
Yes.
that meeting also.
Yes, so we'll get a comprehensive calendar poll out to everybody and see if we can find something there.
Okay, very good.
In that summary, would it be all right to include the idea that Paul mentioned that it might cause angst, but I thought it was a good idea to look at all city supportive service funding, so we're not.
Oh, I was gonna include the outside agency
In the-
funding, is that
Yes,
what?
that in there.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's what you're asking for, if we're all on the right page, yes.
Any other discussion? Thank you. Under quick updates and other new business, Chair took the privilege to introduce Christina at the beginning of the meeting. And Shannon, why don't we have you describe the handout that you just distributed at the beginning of the meeting?
So, similar to us, HUD periodically will send out a NOFA saying, we have these things available, we have funding for these things that are available. Please apply. And so last year, the Housing Authority, we applied for what are called non-elderly disabled mainstream vouchers. And last year, we were awarded 19, and so we have been leasing those 19 vouchers that we received. We are 100% leased in the 19 that we got from last year. We again applied this year for additional vouchers, and we were just awarded 27 additional vouchers. And so these are vouchers for, as Christina said, some particularly vulnerable community members that we serve, because everybody must be disabled. The focus is on homeless recipients. And so we will, starting January 1, those come online for us, and we'll start leasing these 27.
Great. So that's a total of 46?
Yep.
Great.
That's excellent. Now, for what period of time are those funded?
So your first funding block is for the first year, 1 year, and in that you have to make sure you get 80% leased, otherwise there is an issue with being able to get the second year funding. Our experience is they've never promised you forever. Right? I think that's a terrible song, right? Isn't that a bad love song? They never promise you forever, but we have never had a voucher taken out of our inventory. And so once you sort of complete that first year, they become part of our inventory. So 14, 15, 16, we took VASH vouchers, which are vouchers for homeless veterans. We got 3 different allocations for a total of 45, and they are now continued to be funded with us every year.
Okay.
So I anticipate that as long as we use them, we continue to get the funding for them.
Great.
And we will use them.
Great. That's excellent.
Let me be really clear.
Tina, can you speak to the size, the needs of, and who those vouchers serve, or what you're seeing with that?
Yeah, well, it's, most other agencies did not get 100% leased in their first year. And what we do, because we have these home programs, so where we come out of the city home TBRA, because almost everybody in that program is homeless. I mean, they just are. And then we also have a state home program that we run with Bert Nash. And so the folks who graduate from those temporary 24-month programs can always use these. So what it then does is it frees up, we have 732 straight Section 8 vouchers. And we usually allow the people graduating out of those programs, New Horizons would be another one, anybody who would qualify. So these vouchers could be used for those folks. And so then it gives us room, right, for new voucher holders. The current wait list on our vouchers is about not quite 400, and about a third of those are non-elderly disabled. So we have plenty of demand, still not enough supply.
Very good. Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
Next item, discuss requests from tenants to homeowners to change the 2016 demonstration project.
And I will recuse myself, but Nicholas is here to speak for tenants to homeowners if you have questions.
Very good. And Nicholas, you want to lead the discussion here for us?
Absolutely. See if I can never raise this.
Oh.
Is this on, or am I just speaking? This is on, okay. So yeah, Nicholas Ward with Tenants to Homeowners, and I'm following up on what was just brought up here. There's the home at 906 LaSalle, which was built as a partnership with 5 agencies, and the person who was living in that space has become eligible to move into a larger space. She had a big enough family to where it was applicable for her to move into a 5-bedroom home instead of the home at 906 LaSalle, which is a 4-bedroom home. And so what Tenants to Homeowners is requesting is that since the home is going to be unoccupied for a moment, that we're able to transition that rental unit into a home ownership unit, which would allow the home to be sold, still remain permanently affordable, but that it would become a home ownership versus rental unit. And then that would allow tenants to homeowners to pull forth $140,000 of the $210,000 value, so leaving $70,000 in the home to subsidize the cost of the home, the purchase price of the home. And that we would be able to utilize that to support projects that we have going on, including 13 homes that we brought into our programs over the last year through different partnerships.
And describe how those funds would be used to support those homes. What is that mechanism? What's being done? Are those rentals then?
Mm-hmm.
The others?
Yeah, all of those are rentals. And so the way that those are being done, there's houses on Maple, which some of you were able to attend the opening for those houses this summer/early fall, summer, I believe. And we're basically creating our own vouchers, the way I understand it, through those homes where, you know, regardless of the value of the home itself, that we're renting those out at 1/3 of a person's average monthly income. And so if someone is making, you know, $1,500 a month, they're paying $500 a month for a home that is valued differently. And it's the same, slightly different but similar with the houses that we're doing, that we're in partnership with KU Endowment. And those homes, beyond just the subsidy for rental, it's also some updates and things, because those are homes that we did not construct. Those are older homes that we were lucky enough to bring into the program. But because of that, they also require some just very general updates in terms of safety. We've talked about implementing security devices for those homes just to make them a little more secure and peace of mind. And yeah, I think that's some of the basic stuff on it.
So what you just described could be funded by pulling the $70,000 that you want to pull out of the value of this home would be used for those purposes?
So the $70,000 would remain with the home as a subsidy. So the value of the home is $210,000, and it would be sold for $140,000. And so we'd be taking the $140,000 to put back into programs.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I had the numbers flipped. Yeah, okay.
And then we're also, for our applicant pool, the next person in line would be someone that we're bringing up that's already renting through us. They're renting a 3-bedroom, and they're eligible for a 4-bedroom. And so they'd be moving up from rental into home ownership. So we're stepping them up in that way. And then we're also making available a 3-bedroom that we have that is located just a block from downtown.
So does this board need to make a movement? I mean, do we need to approve this as a change?
It's a change use of the project that of a facility that we had funded for rental purposes, correct?
Yeah, so there was, city staff could speak to that better, I think.
Yeah, Diane?
Yeah, so in reviewing this particular agreement, there's a couple of unique things. We didn't find that there was a particular reference in the funding agreement to rental. It just simply said that it was going to be for a permanently affordable home. So I think that we are fine without making that. And then also I know the application spoke to that, and in this particular agreement, we didn't have the application incorporated as part of the formal agreement, which we have been typically doing with the ones we've been doing the past several years. So there's not a formal amendment necessary for the agreement in this case. I just think it's important for the board to say you're okay with this. And what we would do then, I think, is we need to have a tracking mechanism and just to be able to note why we're counting that as a home ownership unit and not a rental unit on the report. And if anybody ever went back and thought, well, it says this, we'll just make appropriate notes to the
That it was
file.
converted
Yes.
from one purpose to another. No?
Right.
Any comments, concerns?
I like this proposal. I like this proposal.
I really like the idea of being able to free up some dollars
Yep.
that can be reinvested in some of the other assets to make them more appropriate for their purpose. Christina, you had a comment?
Yeah, I would say I'm in full support. I mean, I know it's my first day, but I know how hard and how difficult it is to have an affordable unit at 4 bedrooms. And then moving up from that, and having a person that is able and eligible from a 3-bedroom to move up and still consistently keeping them in a program and supporting them, I think it's wonderful.
So, seeing that there's no formal action taken by this board, I say, Nicholas, thank you very much for the update.
Thank you.
Best wishes with that project. And now for the American Planning Association's Housing Policy Guide.
This is just really for your receipt. I
Yep.
don't know if staff has any other comments, but there were some interesting concepts in there, and maybe just draw your attention as it relates to those policy platforms of the APA Association in the background, in the very back of the document. So this might be something that we could attach to your retreat, maybe with the toolkit, and then you may have want to discuss or reference some of that in the future.
Well, if many of you are like me, you've not had a chance to review this document yet, so it's hard to discuss it. But an item probably for future discussion, possibly at our retreat.
We could add it on where we have the toolkit.
Okay?
Perfect.
Okay. That concludes our meeting agenda. Is there any other new business to bring before the board at this time? Seeing none, our next meeting will be January 13th. Look for a meeting maker from Diane searching for dates that are the best for off-site retreat. And our meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.